If Sarah Mitchell had known that Google Maps would lead her into the mouth of a winter storm that meteorologists would later call the worst blizzard to hit the Cascade Range in 40 years, she might have made different choices. But sitting in a dying Honda Civic on the evening of December 23rd, with her 8-year-old daughter wrapped in every blanket they owned, and the fuel gauge resting on a position that defied physics, different choices felt like luxuries from another lifetime. The temperature inside the car had dropped below freezing an hour ago. Emma's lips carried a bluish tint that Sarah recognized from her years as a labor and delivery nurse, the early stages of hypothermia creeping in with the patient inevitability of a predator. Scout, their border collie mix, pressed his body against Emma's side, trying to share what little warmth his fur could provide. The dog's breath came out in small clouds, each exhale a reminder that 3 living creatures were slowly losing their battle against the mountain cold. 42 days. That's how long they'd been living in the Civic. Sarah could mark the descent with brutal precision. 6 weeks of parking lots and restroom sinks, of charity meals, and the particular shame of washing her daughter's hair in a McDonald's bathroom while pretending this was an adventure. The math was simple and unforgiving. 3 months behind on an $850 a month apartment equaled $2,550 she didn't have. The hospital where she'd worked for 7 years needed round-the-clock staffing. When Sarah refused the 3rd consecutive night shift because Emma couldn't be left alone overnight, her supervisor's face had carried the expression of someone who'd already made the decision. 72 hours to vacate. That's what the eviction notice gave them. Sarah remembered packing their lives into garbage bags while Emma asked the question that still echoed in the hollow spaces of her chest. Where are we going to live? The lie had come easily then. Just temporarily, sweetheart. Mom will find a new job. But Pine Ridge, Washington had exactly one hospital, and it wasn't hiring. The Walmart parking lot tolerated them for 2 weeks before security started morning patrols. The library lot lasted a week. The 24-hour laundromat offered 3 days of fluorescent-lit nights before the owner threatened to call animal control about Scout. Emma had missed the first 3 weeks of 3rd grade because Sarah couldn't provide a stable address for enrollment. The free meals at St. Augustine's Church came with sympathetic looks that hurt worse than hunger. Emma's small voice broke through the memory. "Mama, my toes stopped working." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She kept the engine running as long as possible, rationing the last quarter tank of gas like liquid gold. But the alternator had been failing for weeks, and when the dashboard lights flickered and died 20 minutes ago, she'd made the choice between freezing now or dying later when they needed the car to escape. Later won. The key turned uselessly in the ignition, producing nothing but a clicking sound that mocked her desperation. Through the windshield, the world had disappeared into white chaos. The road, County Road 47, according to her dying phone's GPS, no longer existed beneath the accumulated snowfall. Sarah had taken the suggested route when Google Maps promised a faster path around the storm building over downtown Pine Ridge. The algorithm hadn't mentioned that faster meant higher elevation, narrower roads, and zero cell service once the mountains swallowed the last transmission tower. The phone's battery indicator showed 23%. The last bar of signal had vanished 30 minutes ago. Sarah had been reaching for reasons: escape the city where social workers might spot a woman and child living in a car, find the abandoned cabin or closed for winter campground, anywhere with walls and a door that locked. The logic seemed sound when she'd made the turn onto the highway. Now it felt like the final mistake in a long series of catastrophic decisions. Scout suddenly lifted his head, ears perking toward the passenger window. Emma stirred beneath her cocoon of blankets, following the dog's gaze into the storm. The child's hand emerged from the layers to press against the fogged glass. "Mama, look!" Sarah leaned forward, squinting through the snow that attacked the windshield like it had personal grievances. For a moment, she saw nothing but the white void that had swallowed them. Then, barely visible through the curtain of falling snow and the filter of gathering dusk, a shape emerged from the tree line. Dark, massive, 3 stories tall, if her depth perception could be trusted through the distortion. The rational part of Sarah's brain, the part trained to read monitors and assess vital signs, suggested this might be a hallucination. 18 hours since their last real meal. Stress levels that would send any medical chart into red zones. The human mind produced mirages when pushed past its limits. But Emma saw it too, so, and Scout's tail had begun a hesitant wag that suggested the dog's senses confirmed what their eyes reported. The building stood perhaps 200 meters away, though the storm made distance difficult to judge. It appeared to be constructed of dark timber and stone, with a large porch wrapping around what she could see of the front. No light showed in any windows. No smoke rose from chimneys that her desperate imagination wanted to believe existed somewhere in that dark silhouette. Emma's question carried the weight of everything they'd lost and everything they might still save. Is it real? Sarah made herself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she'd coached 1,000 laboring mothers through contractions. The building didn't vanish when she blinked. 200 meters. In normal conditions, a 3-minute walk. In knee-deep snow, carrying a hypothermic child with a dog struggling through drifts, Sarah gave it 15 minutes if they were lucky. The alternative was staying in the car, watching the temperature drop, waiting for the cold to make decisions for them. Sarah had seen enough death in delivery rooms gone wrong to recognize the moment when action became the only option, even if that action carried its own terrible risks. We're going to that building, you, me, and Scout. I'll carry you. Can you be brave? Emma's nod came with a tremor that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with the fear that had become their constant companion. Sarah gathered the warmest blankets, 2 quilts and a sleeping bag she'd bought at Goodwill, and wrapped her daughter like they were preparing for Arctic expedition rather than a desperate sprint to shelter. Scout needed no preparation. The dog understood survival at a level that transcended training. The moment Sarah opened the driver's door, the storm attacked. Wind hit her face with enough force to snap her head back. Snow invaded the car like it had been waiting for the opportunity. The temperature outside made the freezing interior feel tropical by comparison. 15 below, maybe lower with wind chill. Sarah lifted Emma from the back seat, feeling the child's weight settle against her chest with the terrible lightness of someone who hadn't eaten enough in weeks. The first step into the snow taught her that 200 meters might as well be 2 miles. Her boots, canvas sneakers that predated the eviction, sank immediately to mid-calf. The snow wasn't the fluffy Christmas card variety. This was dense, wet, and heavy, each step requiring her to lift her leg high enough to clear the previous drift before plunging into the next. Scout bounded ahead, then circled back, then ahead again, breaking trail where he could but sinking just as deep in places. 20 steps. Sarah's thighs burned. 50 steps. Her lungs screamed protest at air. It was so cold it felt like inhaling knives. Emma's face pressed into Sarah's shoulder, the child's breath warm against her neck, a reminder of why stopping wasn't an option. The building grew larger as they approached, resolving from shadow into structure. A lodge of some kind, built in the classic mountain style with heavy timber framing and a stone foundation that suggested permanence. The porch steps materialized from the snow like a gift. Sarah's foot found the first step, then the second. Solid wood beneath accumulated white. Someone had built this place to last. Scout reached the porch first, shaking snow from his coat in an explosion of white. Sarah followed, her legs trembling from exertion and cold. The porch offered blessed relief from the wind, though the temperature barely improved. She set Emma down carefully, keeping the blankets wrapped tight. The front door stood before them like a judgment. Solid oak, maybe mahogany, with carved details visible even under the coating of ice. Sarah raised her fist and knocked. The sound echoed with a hollow quality that suggested empty rooms beyond. She knocked again. Harder. Hello? We're stuck in the storm. Is anyone here? The wind answered with a howl that sounded almost mocking. Sarah moved along the porch, trying each window. Locked. Everyone. The glass thick enough to resist her experimental pushes. She circled to the side, finding more windows, more locked entrances, more evidence that whatever this place was, it hadn't seen occupants in some time. The snow on the porch lay undisturbed except for their own tracks. No footprints leading to or from the door. No vehicle tracks in the driveway she could now see curving away into the trees. Emma's voice, weak and getting weaker. Mama, I'm really cold. The decision crystallized with the clarity that comes when every other option has been eliminated. Sarah looked around the porch until her eyes landed on a heavy wooden chair, its seat cushion frozen solid. She grabbed it with both hands, feeling the weight of what she was about to do settle into her bones alongside the cold. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. The chair hit the window with force born of desperation. Glass shattered with a sound that seemed to crack the frozen air itself. Shards fell inward, some landing on what looked like hardwood floor, others catching on the window frame. Sarah used the chair to clear the remaining teeth of glass from the bottom edge, then turned to Emma. Into the castle, my lady. The weak giggle that escaped Emma's blue lips made the breaking and entering worthwhile. Sarah lifted her daughter through the window, careful to avoid any remaining glass, then helped Scout scramble through before pulling herself up and over the sill. Her palm caught on a missed shard, opening a thin line that welled red against white skin. But pain was a distant concern compared to the immediate need for warmth. Inside, the air felt marginally less hostile. Not warm, but still. The absence of wind changed everything. Sarah's flashlight, her phone's dying contribution to their survival, revealed a grand entryway with high ceilings and exposed timber beams. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dulled by what looked like years of dust. To the left, an archway opened into what appeared to be a massive living room. Emma whispered with something close to wonder, "This place doesn't feel scary." Sarah understood what her daughter meant. The house carried a quality of sadness rather than menace, like a hound waiting for an owner who would never return. They moved through the archway into the living room, Sarah's light revealing leather sofas arranged around a fireplace that dominated the far wall. The hearth stood tall enough that Sarah could have walked into it without ducking. And beside it, stacked neatly as if someone had just prepared for the evening, firewood. Lots of firewood. Sarah's hands shook as she opened drawers in a side table, searching with the focused intensity of someone who understood that fire meant life. The third drawer yielded matches in a waterproof container. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, fumbled the first match. The second caught. She touched it to the newspaper she'd crumpled. Last week's edition of the Pine Ridge Gazette that someone had left on the coffee table, and watched flames spread with the gratitude of someone witnessing a miracle. The kindling caught. The larger pieces followed. Within minutes, actual warmth began radiating into the room, and Sarah felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in hours. She found quilts in a nearby closet, clean, if musty, and spread them on the floor in front of the growing fire. Emma collapsed onto them with Scout immediately flopping beside her, both child and dog drawn to the heat like pilgrims to a shrine. Sarah allowed herself to sit, to breathe, to acknowledge that they'd survived the immediate crisis even as she recognized the larger implications of what she'd done. She'd broken into someone's home, destroyed their property. Was, by any legal definition, trespassing. The woman who'd spent 7 years following hospital protocols and traffic laws had just crossed a line she'd never imagined approaching. But Emma's lips were returning to pink. Scout's shivering had stopped, and Sarah would break 1,000 windows before she'd let her daughter freeze to death in a car. Later, after Emma had fallen into sleep so deep it looked like unconsciousness, after Sarah had verified the child's breathing and pulse and temperature enough times to convince her nurse's instincts that recovery was progressing, she allowed herself to explore. The kitchen yielded canned goods with expiration dates suggesting they'd been purchased within the last decade. Green beans, corn, soup, peaches, even pancake mix in a sealed container. The gas stove ignited at her first attempt. The click, click, whoosh of flame as beautiful as any sound she'd heard. Upstairs, 5 bedrooms waited in various states of suspended animation. Each room looked like its occupant had stepped out temporarily rather than abandoned permanently. In the largest bedroom, clearly the master suite, Sarah found a dresser topped with a stack of letters bound in ribbon and a leather journal that drew her hand like magnetism. The journal's cover was soft with age and handling. Sarah opened it with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts, and Catherine Carter's handwriting welcomed her into a life that had clearly held great love and greater loss. December 2006. We promised ourselves this lodge would be our sanctuary. March 2007. Robert taught Owen how to chop wood today. I supervise from a safe distance with Coco. July 2007, Robert's software company is exceeding all projections. The algorithm he created is being licensed by major firms. We talked about early retirement, living here permanently with Owen, homeschooling him in this beautiful place where he can learn from nature and books instead of crowded classrooms and standardized tests. October 2007, we've never been happier. Owen turned 7 today. We're driving to the city for his birthday party with Robert's parents. We'll be back Sunday night. Then nothing. Blank pages extending to the journal's end. No final entry, no explanation for why the writing stopped or why this house full of life had been left to gather dust. Sarah closed the journal carefully and carried it back downstairs, where Emma still slept the sleep of the thoroughly exhausted. The fire had burned down to coals. Sarah fed it another log and watched flames climb the new wood with the idle fascination of someone too tired to sleep but too wired to rest. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. But inside these walls, they had warmth, food, shelter. The three things that had seemed impossible to secure just hours ago. Morning arrived without announcement, the storm too thick to permit much distinction between night and day. Sarah woke to Scout's tongue on her face and Emma sitting up on the quilts, looking around the room with the wonder of someone seeing it fresh. "Mama, this is like a castle." The child's enthusiasm would have been infectious under other circumstances. Sarah managed a smile and levered herself upright, feeling muscles protest from yesterday's trek through the snow. The fire had died to embers. She rebuilt it while her mind cataloged their situation with clinical precision. They had shelter, at least temporarily. The storm showed no signs of breaking, which meant leaving wasn't an option even if they had somewhere to go. The canned goods would last perhaps 3 weeks if they were careful. Water could be melted from snow. Heat came from abundant firewood, but eventually the storm would end, and then someone would come. The owner, the police, someone who would want explanations for broken windows and occupied rooms. Scout's sudden movement toward the front door pulled Sarah from her spiral of worry. The dog's ears perked forward, his tail beginning a tentative wag. Then she heard it, the distant rumble of an engine, growing closer. Sarah moved to the window, careful to stay out of direct sight line, and watched a yellow snowplow crawl up what must be the lodge's driveway. Behind the wheel sat a man in a sheriff's jacket and sunglasses that seemed excessive for the dim light. The plow came to a stop, and the man climbed out with the unhurried confidence of someone who considered weather a personal challenge rather than a threat. Emma appeared at Sarah's elbow. "Is that the police?" The child's question carried layers of fear that Sarah wished she could erase, but honesty had always been her policy, even when the truth was uncomfortable. "Yes, sweetie, that's the sheriff." The knock on the door, authoritative but not aggressive, made them both jump. Sarah took a breath, squared her shoulders, and went to face whatever consequences her desperation had earned. The sheriff's eyebrows rose when she opened the door. "Well now, that explains the footprints." Sarah attempted a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Good morning, officer." "Morning. Sheriff Tom Bradley. Storm hit hard last night. Roads are a mess. You folks all right?" The question was delivered with what seemed like genuine concern rather than suspicion. Sarah's training in reading people, crucial for assessing laboring mothers in crisis, suggested this man was more interested in their welfare than their legal status. "We're fine. Great. Perfectly warm." The sheriff's gaze moved past her to the broken window, its shattered state obvious even from the porch. "Did you break that window?" "Define break?" Scout chose that moment to trot over, carrying a piece of glass in his mouth like a trophy. The dog dropped it at the sheriff's feet with what looked like pride. "Right." The sheriff's tone carried something that might have been amusement. "I think I have my answer. Ma'am, you're not in trouble. You did what you had to do to stay safe. That storm was deadly. I'm just glad you and your little one made it through." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense she had to lock her knees to stay upright. "Thank you." The sheriff glanced around the interior with the practiced eye of someone familiar with the location. "This place has been empty for close to 18 years now. It's a miracle you stumbled on it." 18 years. Sarah stored that detail away as potentially significant. "Do you know who owns it?" The sheriff's expression shifted to something sadder. The Carter family used to vacation here. Good people, real quiet, kept to themselves mostly, but generous when the town needed something. Then one year they just stopped coming. He paused, seeming to weigh how much to share. Robert and Catherine Carter died in a car accident coming back from the city. October 2007. Their son Owen, he was just 7 years old, survived but was in bad shape. Heard the boy went to live with relatives after that. Never met him myself. Don't know where he ended up. The information landed like puzzle pieces, connecting to the journal Sarah had read the night before. Owen's 7th birthday, the drive to the city, the sudden end to Catherine's entries. A tragedy compressed into the sheriff's brief summary. So the house really is abandoned? Has been. You're not trespassing, not legally anyway. And even if you were, I'd say the blizzard overrides any property concerns. The sheriff cleared his throat. Storm's lifting somewhat. I can drive you into town if you need help. Town meant questions, paperwork, potentially social workers who would want to know why an 80-year-old had missed 3 weeks of school and why her mother had no fixed address to provide. Sarah made her voice as steady as possible. Thank you, but we might stay another night, just until the roads are completely clear. The sheriff nodded as if this made perfect sense. Fair enough. I'll check on you tomorrow. Stay warm. He turned to leave, boots crunching in the snow. Sarah was closing the door, relief making her movements loose, when Scout bolted past her legs with the speed of a dog who'd spotted prey. The animal ran straight to the sheriff and dropped something at his feet. Something long and black that Sarah recognized with horror as one of the bearer bonds from the attic safe she'd found during her midnight exploration of the house. The sheriff bent down, picked up the item, studied it with narrowed eyes. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. What in the world? This is one of those novelty movie props, like from a heist film or something. Sarah's voice came out higher than normal. Yes, exactly. Movie prop. We found it in a box of old costumes. The sheriff handed it back with a chuckle. Well, keep your dog from eating Hollywood next time. When the plow's rumble finally faded into the distance, Sarah closed the door and slid down it until she was sitting on the floor. Emma and Scout joined her, the three of them forming a small huddle of relief and barely avoided disaster. Mama, Emma whispered. What was that really? Sarah looked at the bond in her hand, genuine, worth potentially millions if the safe's contents were what they appeared to be. That, sweetheart, is a very big secret, and we need to figure out what to do about it. The safe had revealed itself the previous night during Sarah's exploration. A pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway led to an attic filled with boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Owen's school projects, Christmas decorations, summer clothes, important documents. It was Emma who'd found the notebook the next morning, while Sarah was attempting to make pancakes on the unfamiliar stove. The child had climbed the attic ladder despite instructions to stay downstairs, drawn by the natural curiosity of 8-year-olds and the promise of treasure. Mama, these are numbers. The notebook contained pages of sequences and codes, most meaning nothing to Sarah's tired brain. But one entry, circled and starred, practically glowed with significance. Emergency Access Lodge Safe. Our beginning, our future, our love. The photo album Sarah found in the living room provided the key. Pictures documented a love story in reverse chronology. Wedding photo dated June 2005 labeled, Our Love. Baby Owen's first photo from May 2006 marked our future. And finally, a candid shot of a younger Robert and Catherine on what appeared to be a first date, September 2004, captioned, Our Beginning. Sarah's hands shook as she climbed back to the attic and knelt before the massive green safe that occupied the far corner. The combination dial looked like something from a bank vault. She turned slowly, 040506. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a mechanical thunk echoed through the attic, and the heavy door swung open on well-oiled hinges. The contents made Sarah's breath catch. Stacks of documents filled the top shelf. Property deeds, insurance policies, legal papers, all bearing the names Robert and Catherine Carter. Below that, cash in labeled envelopes. Emergency fund, Owen's education, house maintenance. $50,000 total if the writing on the envelopes was accurate. But it was the third shelf that transformed everything. Bearer bonds and sealed packets, stock certificates, for something called TechVision Inc., marked as pre-IPO shares, and a letter addressed in Catherine Carter's handwriting, for Owen, in case something happens. Sarah read the letter with growing comprehension of what she'd stumbled into. The woman's words painted a picture of love and preparation, of parents trying to provide for a future they wouldn't live to see. The total estimated value, according to Catherine's careful notation, approached $245 million if the company went public as projected. $245 million sitting in an abandoned attic, waiting for a boy who didn't know it existed. Sarah closed the safe with the same care she'd used to open it. Emma watched from the attic entrance, eyes wide with the understanding that something significant had just occurred. "Mama, are we rich now?" "No, sweetheart, we're extremely confused." They returned to the living room where Sarah made pancakes that tasted like cardboard because her mind was elsewhere. The food was necessary, their bodies needed fuel, but the implications of the safe's contents overwhelmed any appetite. She could take the money, just enough to get them back on their feet. A few thousand from the emergency fund. Who would know? The house had been abandoned for 18 years. Owen Carter clearly wasn't coming back. Except Catherine's letter made it clear this wasn't forgotten wealth. It was a deliberate legacy, carefully preserved for a specific person. And Sarah, despite 42 days of homelessness and desperation that had driven her to break windows, couldn't shake the fundamental truth that had guided her nursing career. Do no harm. Emma's voice broke through the internal debate. "You always say honesty is important." "I do. So we have to find the boy, Owen. We have to tell him about the money." The simplicity of 8-year-old morality cut through Sarah's rationalizations. Emma was right. The money wasn't theirs to keep, no matter how desperately they needed it. But finding Owen Carter 18 years after his parents' death, with no internet access and limited resources, presented challenges that made breaking into the lodge seem simple by comparison. The problem occupied Sarah's thoughts over the next 3 days as the storm gradually weakened. She inventoried their supplies. Enough canned goods for 3 weeks if they were careful. The gas worked. The fireplace provided warmth. They could survive here while she figured out the next steps. On the 4th day, Sheriff Bradley returned as promised, this time with his patrol vehicle navigating the now-plowed driveway. Sarah met him on the porch where he handed her a phone number written on a piece of paper. "Thought you might need this. Maggie Walsh runs the general store in Pine Ridge. She knew the Carter family. Might be able to help you with whatever you're trying to figure out." Sarah took the paper, studying the sheriff's expression for signs that he knew more than he was saying. But his face remained professionally neutral, offering assistance without demanding explanation. "There's something else." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Child Protective Services will probably want to talk to you. Protocol when we find folks living in unusual circumstances with kids. Janet Hobbs is the caseworker for this county. She's fair, but she'll want to verify Emma's being properly cared for." The warning hit Sarah like a fist. Of course, CPS would be involved. A homeless woman and her daughter squatting in an abandoned lodge would trigger every red flag in the system. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis of survival that she hadn't thought through the official consequences. "When?" "She'll probably contact you within the week. My advice? Be honest with her. Janet can tell the difference between neglect and hard circumstances, but you'll need to show her you're working towards stability." After the sheriff left, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and forced herself to think strategically. She had maybe a week before CPS arrived. A week to transform from homeless trespasser into someone with a plan. The first step was obvious. She needed to contact whoever handled the Carter estate. The letter mentioned an attorney named Robert Hayes in Seattle. The phone in the lodge had no dial tone. Sarah's cell battery was nearly dead, and even if she could charge it, there was no signal this deep in the mountains, which meant a trip to town, to Maggie Walsh's general store, if the sheriff's suggestion was to be trusted. The next morning, Sarah asked if the sheriff could give them a ride when he did his next patrol. He agreed without hesitation, arriving at 9 with the kind of punctuality that suggested he'd been waiting for the request. Pine Ridge revealed itself as a town of 2,400 people, one main street, and the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's business. The general store occupied a corner building with a hand-painted sign, Walsh's General Store, established 1972. Inside, warmth and the smell of coffee greeted them. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that immediately focused on Emma. "You must be the Mitchell family. Tom Bradley mentioned you might stop by." Sarah managed a cautious smile. "I'm Sarah, this is Emma. Maggie Walsh, owner, operator, and apparently town gossip according to my late husband's assessment." She said it with humor that invited them to relax. "Tom said you were staying at the Carter Lodge, that you might be looking for information about the family." The directness was unexpected, but somehow welcome after days of uncertainty. Sarah glanced at Emma, then back to Maggie. "I found some things at the lodge, personal items that should go to Owen Carter. I'm trying to locate him." Maggie's expression shifted to something sad and knowing. "Owen, haven't heard that name in years. My brother William was Robert Carter's best friend. They went to college together, stayed close after. When Robert and Catherine died, William tried to stay in contact with Owen. The boy's aunt, Catherine's sister, took him away, cut all ties, said Owen needed a fresh start without reminders." "Do you know where they went?" "No. And William passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack, so I can't ask him." Maggie studied Sarah with an assessment that felt measuring rather than judgmental. "But William left me with instructions. He said if Owen ever came back, to tell him his parents loved him more than anything, and if anyone needed sanctuary at that lodge, to help them, because that's what Robert and Catherine would want." The word sanctuary echoed Catherine's letter so precisely that Sarah felt the hairs on her neck rise. They wanted it to be a refuge. For people who needed a second chance. Robert used to say everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild when life knocks them down. Maggie leaned forward on the counter. "Tom tells me you've had some hard times, lost your job, your home, that you've been keeping your daughter safe however you could." Sarah's throat tightened, admitting failure to a stranger shouldn't hurt more than living it, but somehow it did. "Yes. I need someone part-time at the store. 20 hours a week, $15 an hour. Not much, but it's steady, and you can bring Emma on after school. I'll watch her." The offer was so unexpected that Sarah couldn't immediately process it. "Why would you help me?" "Because it's what William would want. Because I see a woman trying to do right by her daughter. And because I think maybe Robert and Catherine's lodge had found the person it was waiting for." Sarah accepted the job because refusing would have been both stupid and ungrateful. Maggie directed her to Jake Thompson's auto repair shop 3 blocks away, where a taciturn man in his 50s agreed to fix the Honda Civic for free after learning Sarah was staying at the Carter Lodge. "Mr. Carter helped me open this garage, lent me money when the bank wouldn't, told me to pay it back when I could, no interest." Jake's voice was gruff with emotion held firmly in check. "Never got to thank him proper. Fixing your car settles that debt." The pattern continued through the day. Dr. Ellen Foster at the Pine Ridge Medical Clinic offered free health examinations for Emma, explaining that Catherine had helped pay her daughter's college tuition. Principal George Harris at Pine Ridge Elementary enrolled Emma immediately with waivers for the usual documentation, mentioning Robert's donation of computers to the school library. By the time the sheriff drove them back to the lodge that evening, Sarah understood something profound. Robert and Catherine Carter had touched many lives in this small town. Their generosity was returning now, channeled through people who remembered kindness and wanted to honor it by helping the strangers who'd found sanctuary in the Carter Lodge. But help with jobs and car repairs didn't solve the central problem. Sarah still needed to find Owen Carter. She needed to return what belonged to him. And she needed to do it before CPS decided Emma required removal from an unstable situation. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah used her phone's last 5% of battery to search for any information about Owen Carter or the attorney Robert Hayes. The weak signal from town finally reached the lodge, and she found a listing. Hayes and Associates, Estate and Trust Law, Seattle. She wrote down the number on a scrap of paper and made a promise to herself. Tomorrow she'd find a way to call. She'd explain the situation to this Robert Hayes person and let him help locate Owen. It was the right thing to do, the only thing to do, even if doing the right thing meant giving up the one place where she and Emma had finally found something resembling safety. The payphone outside Walsh's General Store accepted quarters with the reluctant clicks of machinery built before Sarah was born. She fed $3 in change, precious coins from her first week's wages, and dialed the Seattle number with fingers that trembled from more than the January cold. A professional voice answered on the second ring. Hayes and Associates, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with Mr. Hayes about Owen Carter and the Carter family estate. The pause that followed stretched long enough for Sarah to wonder if the connection had failed. Then, please hold. 15 minutes passed. Sarah watched Emma and Scout play in the small park across the street, the child's laughter carrying on winter air while the dog bounded through snow that no longer felt life-threatening. The normalcy of the scene, daughter playing, mother making a phone call, felt like a costume that didn't quite fit someone who'd been homeless 6 weeks ago. A different voice came on the line, male and measured with the careful neutrality of someone trained to reveal nothing. This is Robert Hayes. You mentioned Owen Carter? Mr. Hayes, I know this sounds strange, but I'm currently staying at the Carter Family Lodge in the mountains near Pine Ridge. I found a safe in the attic containing financial assets and a letter addressed to Owen from his mother, Catherine. The attorney's response came quick and sharp. Ma'am, I receive multiple calls per year from individuals claiming to have discovered Carter family assets. This is a common fraud scheme. I'll need substantial proof before discussing any client information. Sarah had anticipated skepticism. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this conversation, rehearsing what details would prove authenticity versus what might sound like research from old newspaper articles. I can read you portions of Catherine's letter. She mentions you specifically as the trust attorney. She references William Walsh as Owen's designated guardian. The safe combination is based on significant family dates, 04, 05, 06. The silence on the other end felt different now, weighted with attention rather than dismissal. Continue. The letter mentions Tech Vision Incorporated and pre-IPO stock certificates. It lists cash reserves of $50,000 and bearer bonds valued at $5 million. Catherine estimates the total value at $245 million if the company goes public as she projects. Hayes's breathing changed audibly. How do you know about William Walsh? That guardianship arrangement was never made public. Because I'm holding Catherine's handwritten letter, Mr. Hayes. I'm not attempting fraud. I need to find Owen Carter so I can return what belongs to him. The attorney's professional veneer cracked just enough to let genuine surprise through. Where exactly are you located? Carter Lodge, County Road 47, approximately 12 miles from Cascade Summit. The address is, I know the address, Ms. I don't believe I caught your name. Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell, I need you to photograph the documents you found and send them to my office email. The connection quality here is poor, but if you can get to town where there's internet access, send whatever images you can manage. Sarah had anticipated this request as well. The Pine Ridge Public Library offered 30 minutes of free computer time to patrons, and she'd already created an email account during Emma's first week at school. I can do that today. What's the address? Hayes provided it, then added, I'll need to verify the handwriting and document authenticity. If everything checks out, we'll need to discuss next steps. This is, Mr. Mitchell, in 30 years of estate law, I've never encountered a situation quite like this. The photographs took 4 hours to upload on the library's ancient internet connection. Sarah had used her phone to capture images of Catherine's letter, the safe's contents, and the property deed that listed Robert and Catherine Carter as owners. Each file crept through the digital pipeline with agonizing slowness, while Emma did homework at a nearby table and Scout waited patiently outside, tied to a bike rack with a length of rope Maggie had provided. Hayes called back the next morning while Sarah was stocking shelves at the general store. Maggie handed over her personal cell phone without question, somehow understanding the call's importance before Sarah explained. Ms. Mitchell, I verified the documents. The handwriting matches Catherine Carter's known signature on multiple estate filings. The deed is legitimate. The stock certificates appear genuine based on serial numbers and security features. His voice carried a quality Sarah recognized from her nursing days, the tone medical staff used when delivering news that would fundamentally alter someone's reality. The letter mentions $245 million in estimated value. Tech Vision went public in 2015. The current market value of those shares is approximately $287 million. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Hearing the number, spoken aloud by someone who dealt in such figures, professionally made it real in ways the letter hadn't. And you want to return all of it to Owen Carter? Yes, sir. It's not mine. Hayes exhaled slowly. Mrs. Mitchell, there's information about Owen you need to understand. He uses the name Michael now, Michael Carter. I've served as his trust attorney since his parents' death. When he turned 18, he received access to a foundational trust fund of approximately $500,000 for education and living expenses. Sarah processed this carefully. So he knows about some of the inheritance. Yes, but not all of it. Robert and Catherine established what we call a two-tier structure. The first tier, which Michael has accessed, was meant to provide for his basic needs and education without overwhelming him with massive wealth during his formative years. The second tier, the contents of that safe, was designed to remain undiscovered until certain conditions were met or until Michael turned 30, whichever came first. Why structure it that way? Because Catherine and Robert wanted their son to develop normally. They believed, and I agreed with their assessment, that revealing nearly $300 million to a traumatized teenager would have derailed his development. The safe was meant to be found when Michael was mature enough to handle the responsibility, or when someone with integrity discovered it and sought out its rightful owner. A pause. You appear to be the latter scenario. The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a physical thing. She'd stumbled into a plan 18 years in the making, designed by parents who tried to protect their son even from beyond death. There's a complication, Hayes continued. After the accident, Michael refused all connection to the lodge. He's asked me repeatedly to sell the property. He believes everything related to his parents' estate has been resolved and wants no reminders of what he lost. If I tell him about the safe, it will reopen wounds that have barely begun to heal. Sarah understood the dilemma without Hayes having to spell it out. Honoring Michael's wishes meant keeping life-changing information from him. Revealing the truth meant forcing him to confront a past he'd spent 18 years trying to escape. Neither option offered clean resolution. What do you recommend? Give me a few days. I'll contact Michael carefully. This news needs to be delivered in person, not over the phone. In the meantime, Ms. Mitchell, I need to understand your situation. Sheriff Bradley filed a report about finding you and your daughter sheltering at the lodge during the storm. Are you still residing there? The question carried implications beyond simple logistics. Sarah chose her words with the precision of someone who knew her answer would shape outcomes. Yes, we have nowhere else to go. I lost my job and home several months ago. We were living in our car when the storm forced us to seek shelter. I know we're technically trespassing, but according to property law, the lodge has been legally abandoned for more than the statutory period. Your emergency occupation during a life-threatening storm is defensible. However, Hayes paused as if consulting notes. I understand Child Protective Services has been notified of the situation. Janet Hobbs is scheduled to interview us tomorrow. Ms. Mitchell, CPS will want to see evidence of stable housing and income. Your employment at the general store helps, but living in a property you don't own or rent legally creates complications. I may be able to assist with documentation that makes your presence less problematic, but I'll need to discuss options with Michael first. After the call ended, Sarah returned the phone to Maggie with thanks and went back to stocking shelves, her mind churning through scenarios. She had a job that paid $300 a week. Jake had fixed the Honda, giving them transportation. Emma was enrolled in school and thriving for the first time since the eviction. But none of that would matter if CPS decided the living arrangement was too unstable. Janet Hobbs arrived at the lodge the following afternoon, driving a county vehicle that announced her official capacity before she'd even stepped out. Sarah watched from the window as the caseworker gathered a tablet and file folder, straightening her coat against the cold with movements that spoke of routine rather than judgment. The knock came firm, but not aggressive. Sarah opened the door to a woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes and the kind of professional assessment that missed nothing. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Janet Hobbs from Child Protective Services. We spoke on the phone. They settled in the living room where Sarah had made sure the fire burned cleanly and the space looked as organized as possible. Janet's gaze swept the room, taking in the clean quilts folded on the sofa, the stack of Emma's schoolwork on the coffee table, Scout lying peacefully near the hearth. I need to ask you some questions about your living situation and Emma's care. Sarah forced herself to breathe steadily. Of course. You were homeless for 42 days before arriving here. Is that correct? Yes. I lost my job at Pine Ridge Regional Hospital when I couldn't accommodate mandatory night shifts. I'm a single mother with no family support in the area. After falling behind on rent, I was evicted. We lived in our car while I searched for new employment and housing. Janet made notes on her tablet without looking up. Did you seek assistance from shelters or social services? I applied for housing assistance and was placed on a wait list with an estimated 18 to 24-month wait. I applied for food assistance but was denied due to lack of a fixed address. The nearest shelter was 40 miles away and had a 2-week maximum stay. I used that time to look for work but found nothing that would allow me to afford both housing and childcare. Emma missed 3 weeks of school. The accusation in that statement was mild but present. Sarah met it directly. Yes, I couldn't enroll her without a permanent address. I taught her daily using books from the library. Principal Harris confirmed she's now caught up with her class and performing at grade level. Janet looked up from the tablet. You're currently employed at Walsh's General Store for 20 hours weekly at $15 per hour. That's $300 a week, $1,200 per month. Insufficient for market rate housing plus other expenses. I'm aware. I'm actively looking for additional work or increased hours. And your current residence is a property you neither own nor rent. You're here because you broke in during an emergency. Is that an accurate characterization? The bluntness was clearly intentional, a test to see how Sarah would respond to uncomfortable truths. Yes, I broke a window to access shelter when my daughter was showing signs of hypothermia. Sheriff Bradley confirmed there are no trespassing charges, and the property has been legally abandoned for 18 years. Janet set the tablet aside and fixed Sarah with a direct stare. Ms. Mitchell, I'm going to speak frankly. My job is to assess whether children are being properly cared for. On paper, your situation raises significant concerns. Homelessness, unstable housing, insufficient income, interrupted education. Any one of those factors might trigger intervention. All of them together. She let the implication hang. Sarah's chest tightened, but she refused to look away. I understand. However, I also need to assess the actual care being provided versus the circumstances surrounding it. So I'd like to speak with Emma privately, if that's acceptable to you. It wasn't acceptable, but Sarah had no power to refuse. She nodded and stood. I'll be in the kitchen. Through the wall, she could hear the murmur of voices, but not the specific words. She gripped the counter edge and counted her breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, the pattern nurses used to manage stress during codes and crises. Scout padded into the kitchen and pressed against her legs, offering silent support with his solid presence. The interview lasted 12 minutes. When Janet called Sarah back, Emma's eyes were red, but her posture was straight, a child who'd learned to be brave when circumstances demanded it. Janet remained on the sofa, but her expression had shifted to something more complex than professional assessment. Emma, could you take Scout outside for a few minutes? Your mother and I need to talk. After they'd gone, Janet picked up her tablet, but didn't consult it. Your daughter is articulate, well-adjusted despite obvious stress, and clearly devoted to you. She described times when you went without food to make sure she ate. She talked about how you helped her with homework in parking lots and sang to her when she was scared at night. Sarah's throat closed around words she couldn't form. She also told me she doesn't want to live anywhere else. That you're the person who makes her feel safe. Janet leaned forward slightly. Ms. Mitchell, I see actual neglect regularly in this job. Parents who don't feed their children, who leave them unsupervised for days, who prioritize substances or relationships over basic care. You're not that. You're someone who encountered circumstances that overwhelmed your resources and made choices to protect your child. Relief started to build in Sarah's chest, but Janet's raised hand stopped it from fully forming. However, I can't ignore the instability. Emma needs consistent housing. She needs to know she'll sleep in the same place tomorrow as she did today. Right now, you can't guarantee that because this isn't your home. Janet set the tablet down with deliberate care. I'm going to give you a probationary period of 30 days. During that time, you must accomplish 4 things. First, secure stable legal housing, either through rental agreement, documented permission to reside here, or other verifiable arrangement. Second, maintain Emma's school enrollment and attendance. Third, keep your employment or find additional income sources. Fourth, attend 2 parenting support meetings I'll arrange. Sarah's voice came out rough. And if I can't accomplish all of that in 30 days? Janet's expression held genuine regret. Then I'll be required to recommend temporary foster placement while you stabilize your situation. I don't want that outcome, Ms. Mitchell, but I have to prioritize Emma's welfare, and part of welfare is stability. After Janet left, Sarah sat in the quiet lodge and let herself acknowledge the impossible position she occupied. She needed legal housing but couldn't afford it. She needed documentation of her right to be here but had no way to obtain it without Michael Carter's cooperation. And she had 30 days to solve a puzzle that had no obvious solution. The email arrived 2 days later. Maggie let Sarah use the store's computer during her lunch break, and there it sat in her inbox, a message from Hayes with the subject line, "From Michael Carter." Her hands shook as she opened it. "Ms. Mitchell, Robert Hayes told me about you, about finding the safe, and more importantly, about wanting to return everything. I don't know what to say. For 18 years, I've tried to forget that lodge. Every time I think about it, I see the moment the police told me about the accident. I see the room where I waited for my aunt to pick me up. I see the life I had and lost in one night. But through your message," Hayes forwarded your explanation, "I also see something else. A mother protecting her daughter. A woman who could keep $287 million but chose to find the rightful owner. That's the kind of person my parents admired. My mom wrote in her letter that the lodge should be a sanctuary for people who need a second chance. I think you are that person, but I can't just give you $287 million. That wouldn't be fair to you. The tax implications alone would be catastrophic, and it wouldn't honor my parents' intentions. Instead, I propose we establish a nonprofit foundation, the Carter Sanctuary Foundation. You would serve as executive director. The mission would be turning the lodge into refuge for families in transition, those experiencing homelessness, escaping dangerous situations, or needing time to rebuild after crisis. The foundation would own the lodge and manage the endowment. You would receive an annual salary of $75,000, free housing at the lodge, comprehensive health insurance, and budget authority for staffing and programs. You would manage daily operations, hire staff, and determine which families receive assistance. This isn't charity. It's a job, difficult work that will require everything you can give. But I believe you're suited for it in ways no one else could be. If you're willing, I'll come to the lodge on January 25th, my first visit in 18 years, to discuss details and sign necessary documents. Hayes will handle the legal structure. I don't promise this will be easy, but I promise it's an opportunity that could change your life, Emma's life, and the lives of many others who need exactly what you needed 6 weeks ago." Michael Carter. Sarah read the email 3 times, then a fourth, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something she'd misunderstood. But the offer remained consistent across each reading. $75,000 a year, housing, insurance, the ability to help families who face the same desperation she'd known, the ability to keep Emma. She wrote back immediately, fingers flying across the library keyboard, "Mr. Carter, I accept your proposal. Not because of the salary, though $75,000 is beyond anything I imagined earning, but because I want to honor your parents. I've read Catherine's journals and letters. I've met people in Pine Ridge who remember Robert's kindness. They were extraordinary people who believed in second chances. I promise to work with everything I have to make their dream reality. Thank you for trusting me. Sarah Mitchell." Hayes arrived at the lodge 5 days before Michael's scheduled visit, driving a rental sedan that looked comically out of place on the mountain roads. The attorney was 63, but carried himself with the vigor of someone who'd stayed active through decades of sedentary work. He shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip and declined coffee in favor of immediate business. "We have significant legal groundwork to complete before Michael arrives. The foundation structure requires specific paperwork, tax filings, and board establishment. I've brought drafts for your review." They spread documents across the kitchen table while Emma did homework in the living room and Scout supervised from beneath the table. Hayes walked Sarah through the nonprofit formation process. 501c3 status, board composition, operating guidelines, employment contracts. The language was dense with legal terminology. But Hayes translated with the patience of someone who'd explained complex estates to grieving families many times before. The board will consist of 5 members initially. Michael as chairman, myself as treasurer, you as executive director, and 2 community representatives. I suggest Margaret Walsh and Dr. Ellen Foster based on their knowledge of local needs and their connection to the Carter family. Sarah nodded, processing the structure. And the endowment? $287 million transferred to foundation ownership. Conservative investment should generate between 10 and 12 million annually in returns. That's your operating budget. Salary, maintenance, programming, staffing, all comes from that income stream while preserving the principal. The numbers were so large they felt abstract. Sarah tried to ground them in practical terms. How many families could we serve? Hayes consulted his notes. Based on preliminary budget projections, you could house 4 families simultaneously for 3 to 6 months each, with comprehensive support services. That's roughly 8 to 12 families per year, assuming some variation in length of stay. 8 to 12 families who wouldn't have to choose between freezing in a car and breaking into an abandoned house. Sarah felt something expand in her chest. Not quite hope yet, but maybe its precursor. There's one more critical element, Hayes continued. Your employment contract needs to address the CPS situation. The foundation will own the lodge, and as executive director with housing included in your compensation package, you'll have documented legal residence. That should satisfy Janet Hobbs's requirements. The relief was so intense, Sarah had to close her eyes. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is complex work, Ms. Mitchell. You'll be responsible for everything from hiring staff to developing intake procedures to managing conflicts between residents. You'll need to learn nonprofit compliance, grant writing, outcome reporting. The first year will be especially challenging as you establish protocols and build reputation. I understand. Sarah met his gaze directly. I spent 7 years managing labor and delivery. I know how to handle high-stress situations that require quick decisions and careful documentation. I can learn what I don't already know. Hayes studied her with the same assessing look Janet Hobbs had used, but his conclusion appeared to be favorable. Michael chose well. Let's continue. They worked until evening, reviewing documents and discussing logistics. Hayes would file the nonprofit paperwork immediately. The board would officially convene after Michael's visit. Sarah's employment would begin retroactively to January 1st, which would help with the CPS timeline. One last thing, Hayes said as he prepared to leave. Michael is coming here to sign papers and discuss the foundation, but I suspect he's also coming to confront ghosts. This will be the first time he's entered the lodge since the accident. Be patient with him. This is harder for him than he'll let anyone see. After Hayes departed, Sarah walked through the lodge with new awareness. Every room would soon house families in crisis. The kitchen, where she made Emma's meals, would feed children who had known hunger. The bedrooms that had sat empty for 18 years would provide shelter for people who'd run out of options. The lodge Robert and Catherine had built as their sanctuary would become exactly what they'd intended, a refuge for those who needed it most. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah deep-cleaned rooms that hadn't been touched in nearly 2 decades, finding evidence of the life the Carters had lived. Owen's forgotten toy in a closet, Robert's favorite mug in a cabinet, Catherine's gardening journal on a shelf. She collected these items carefully, placing them in a box for Michael. Some people needed to remember before they could move forward. Maggie brought donations from town, extra blankets, kitchen supplies, children's books. Jake appeared with tools and spent an afternoon fixing a loose porch railing and replacing the broken window with proper glass. Dr. Foster stopped by with a first aid kit and instructions for what medical supplies the sanctuary should maintain. The community was investing in something that didn't fully exist yet, making small gestures of faith in a vision they'd only heard described. Sarah watched them work and understood she wasn't building this alone. The sanctuary was already becoming a collective effort. just as Robert and Catherine would have wanted. Emma, for her part, seemed to grasp the significance without needing detailed explanation. She helped clean, organize donated books by reading level, and created a welcome sign for the front door, decorated with drawings of mountains and trees. When Sarah asked if she was ready for someone named Michael to arrive, Emma looked up from her artwork with serious eyes. Is he the boy in the pictures? The one who lost his family? Yes. Then we should be extra kind to him, because losing your family is the worst thing. The simplicity of that assessment, delivered by a child who'd nearly lost her own mother to poverty and circumstance, reminded Sarah why this work mattered. Children understood essential truths that adults complicated with fear and analysis. January 26th arrived with clear skies and temperatures just above freezing. Sarah woke early and made sure the lodge looked welcoming, but not overly prepared. Michael was coming home, not visiting a showroom. The fire burned in the living room hearth. Coffee waited in the kitchen. And on the mantel, the box of items she'd collected sat ready to offer if he wanted them. The SUV appeared at 10 o'clock exactly, black and practical, against the snow-covered driveway. Sarah watched from the window as a man emerged, tall and thin, wearing glasses and carrying a backpack, with the efficiency of someone who traveled light. He stood beside the vehicle for a long moment, looking at the lodge with an expression Sarah couldn't read from this distance. Then he squared his shoulders and walked toward the porch. Sarah opened the door before he could knock. They studied each other in the threshold moment, two people whose lives had intersected through tragedy and luck and the careful planning of the dead. His voice was quiet. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Michael. I don't know where to start. Call me Sarah, and thank you for coming. Emma appeared at her elbow, holding the photograph she'd found and carefully repaired with tape. Young Michael and his parents on this same porch, frozen in a moment before everything changed. She held it out with both hands. Do you want this? It's your family. Michael took the photo with fingers that trembled visibly. He looked at it for several seconds, and Sarah watched his throat work against emotion before he managed to speak. Thank you, I thought I'd lost all the photos. He knelt to Emma's level, and Sarah saw her daughter's expression soften with the compassion she'd shown since she was old enough to recognize sadness in others. Emma reached out and hugged him, spontaneous and brief, but offered without reservation to someone who was essentially a stranger, but also somehow already family. Michael stood slowly, photo clutched carefully. Could I see the house? Sarah led him through rooms that held his childhood, watching as he paused in doorways and touched surfaces with the tentative recognition of someone revisiting a dream. He stopped at the fireplace mantel and ran his fingers along the wood. We always put the Christmas tree right here. Dad insisted on getting one tall enough to nearly touch the ceiling. Mom complained every year that it shed needles everywhere. In the kitchen, he smiled faintly. Sunday pancakes, she sang while she cooked. Terrible voice, but she didn't care. When they reached his childhood bedroom, he stopped in the doorway but didn't cross the threshold. Sarah saw his chest rise and fall with deliberately controlled breathing. I'm not ready for this room yet. Maybe later. Whenever you want, or never. This is your decision. They returned to the living room where Hayes had arrived while they were upstairs. The attorney had spread documents across the coffee table with practiced efficiency. Michael sat on the sofa, Sarah in the armchair, while Emma and Scout retreated to the kitchen to give the adults space. Hayes began the presentation. The foundation is legally established. The paperwork here formalizes board positions, transfers asset ownership, and establishes operating guidelines. Sarah, your employment contract specifies salary, benefits, and housing allowance. Michael, you retain chairman authority, but the daily operations belong to Sarah as executive director. They reviewed each document carefully. Michael asked pointed questions about oversight mechanisms and outcome measurements. Sarah focused on understanding her actual responsibilities versus theoretical authority. After 90 minutes, they'd signed everything that required signatures and initialed everything that required initials. Hayes gathered the papers with visible satisfaction. The Carter Sanctuary Foundation is officially operational. Congratulations to you both. But Michael didn't look or celebratory. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at mountains that had witnessed his parents' last drive. When he spoke, His voice carried weight that suggested the words had been building for days or possibly years. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I didn't just come here to sign papers. She waited, recognizing the cadence of someone preparing to reveal difficult truth. For 18 years, I've been angry at my parents. I know it's not fair. They died. They didn't choose to leave me. But I was angry anyway. Angry they drove back from the city in a snowstorm. Angry they left me alone at 7 years old. Angry I lost the life I had. He turned to face her. When Hayes told me about you, about how you could have kept nearly 300 million but chose to find me instead, something shifted. You reminded me of the values my parents tried to teach. Do the right thing, help others, give people chances. I'd forgotten all that. I spent 18 years focused only on what I lost. Michael gestured to encompass the lodge. But you, someone who lost everything, still chose to do right. You showed me what my parents would have done in your position. You reminded me of who they actually were, not just what I lost when they died. Sarah found her voice. Michael, I can't imagine losing parents at 7, but I know they loved you completely. Every journal entry, every letter, every choice they made, it was all for you. I know that now. I knew it then too, intellectually, but I couldn't feel it because the grief was too big. He sat back down, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. Coming here isn't just about the foundation. It's about learning to forgive myself for surviving when they didn't. About learning to love this place again instead of hating it for being the reason they were on the road that night. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Sarah recognized the shape of it. The survivor's guilt she'd seen in mothers whose babies didn't make it, in fathers who blamed themselves for genetic conditions no one could have prevented. They would want you to live fully, not to punish yourself for being alive. Hayes said something similar. So did my therapist. But I think I needed to hear it here in this house, from someone who understands what it means to fight for survival. Michael met her eyes directly. We can honor them together by making the sanctuary real, by helping families who need exactly what you needed when you broke that window. Sarah felt the partnership solidify in that moment. Not just the legal structure Hayes had created, but something more fundamental, a shared purpose born from different forms of loss in the same commitment to transformation. Then let's make it work. Let's build something worthy of them. Michael extended his hand. She shook it, and in that gesture sealed a collaboration that would reshape both their futures and create sanctuary for dozens of families who hadn't yet arrived, but were already out there somewhere, struggling through their own storms. The renovations began the first week of February, with Michael moving into the small caretaker's cottage that sat 200 yards from the main lodge. He'd rented a furnished apartment in Pine Ridge initially, but after 3 nights of driving the mountain road twice daily, he made the pragmatic choice to stay on the property. The cottage had been built as guest quarters in the lodge's original construction, designed for visiting family who wanted privacy while remaining close. Now it housed a man learning to reconcile his past with his present, working remotely during mornings and wielding hammers during afternoons. Sarah discovered that Michael possessed his father's engineering precision, but none of the casual ease with tools that Robert's journal suggested. He approached each repair with methodical care, measuring 3 times before cutting once, consulting YouTube tutorials on his phone before attempting anything beyond basic carpentry. They worked side by side, transforming the lodge's 5 bedrooms into 4 family suites, each with sleeping quarters, small living areas, and private bathrooms carved from space that had once housed Catherine's sewing room and Robert's home office. The shared kitchen remained largely unchanged, a deliberate choice. Sarah wanted families to cook together, to build the kind of casual intimacy that emerged from passing salt and comparing recipes. The dining room expanded with a table Jake Thompson built from reclaimed barnwood, long enough to seat 20 when the sanctuary reached capacity and the staff joined meals. Emma threw herself into preparation with intensity that surprised Sarah until she understood her daughter was creating the home she desperately wanted during those 42 days in the car. The child organized donated books by age group, labeled toy bins with careful printing, and spent entire afternoons arranging the playroom with zones for reading, building, and pretending. When Sarah suggested she might be overdoing it, Emma's response carried wisdom beyond 8 years. Kids who come here will be scared like I was. They need to see that someone made this place ready for them, that someone thought they mattered before they even arrived. Maggie Walsh proved invaluable in ways that went beyond her general store donations. She understood Pine Ridge's social networks with the fluency of someone who'd lived in the same small town for 6 decades, and she deployed that knowledge with strategic precision. When the sanctuary needed a cook, Maggie knew Patricia Coleman had just lost her restaurant job due to the establishment's closure. When Sarah struggled to find qualified caseworkers willing to relocate to a mountain town, Maggie connected her with two recent social work graduates from the state university who wanted rural experience before pursuing urban careers. By mid-March, the sanctuary had evolved from concept to functioning operation. The nonprofit paperwork had cleared state and federal approval. The endowment sat in diversified investments managed by a firm Hayes recommended. Sarah had hired 5 staff members: Patricia for food service, 2 caseworkers named Jennifer and David, a part-time maintenance coordinator, and a child care specialist who would help with after-school programming and supervision. The soft opening happened on March 15th without fanfare or press attention. Michael had been adamant about avoiding media coverage, wanting the sanctuary to establish its foundation before facing external scrutiny. Instead, they invited the Pine Ridge community, the people who'd helped make this possible through their quiet support and inherited memories of Robert and Catherine's kindness. Sheriff Bradley arrived first, parking his patrol car with the careful precision of someone who'd driven mountain roads in all weather. Doretta Foster brought her daughter, now a resident physician at a Seattle hospital, who wanted to see where her mother's stories originated. Principal Harris came with his wife, and Jake Thompson appeared in clothes so carefully pressed they suggested he'd purchased them specifically for this occasion. Michael stood near the fireplace that had anchored so many childhood memories, looking nervous in ways he'd never appeared during foundation planning or renovation work. Sarah understood. This was the moment when private grief transformed into public legacy, when his parents' dream became something other people could witness and judge. She touched his arm lightly. "You want to say something?" He nodded and waited for the room to quiet. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly, but without the polish of rehearsal. "Today, we're not opening a building. We're opening a possibility. My parents built this place believing it could be sanctuary, refuge, for people who needed safety while rebuilding their lives. For 18 years, that dream sat empty. Now, because of Sarah Mitchell and all of you, it becomes real. We'll make mistakes. We'll learn through failure as much as success. But we'll change lives. That's what my parents would have wanted. That's what we're here to do." The applause was genuine, warm, without being excessive. Maggie wiped her eyes openly. Sheriff Bradley nodded with the satisfaction of someone who'd seen justice completed. And Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly. Not oppressive, but grounding, like an anchor securing a ship against drift. The first family arrived in early April. Maria Johnson called the sanctuary's newly installed phone line after finding the number through a domestic violence hotline that had begun including the Carter Sanctuary in their resource listings. Her voice shook with the controlled panic of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times, but still couldn't make it sound normal. "I have 2 children. Carlos is 9. Sophia is 5. We've been at a shelter for 6 months, but they have a maximum stay policy and our time is ending next week. I have a nursing degree, but I can't work right now because my ex-husband is looking for us, and if I use my license, he'll find us through the state database." Sarah scheduled the intake interview for the following day. Maria arrived in a borrowed car with a nervous energy that manifested in her hands, constantly adjusting her children's clothing, straightening collars that didn't need straightening. Carlos watched his mother with the hyper-awareness of a child who'd learned to monitor adult moods for signs of danger. Sophia clutched a stuffed rabbit with fur, worn smooth from constant handling. They sat in what Sarah had designated as the intake office, a small room off the main hallway furnished with comfortable chairs and a low table. No desks to create barriers, no institutional furniture to remind people of government offices where they'd been processed and documented and found wanting. "This place is beautiful. Too beautiful. I'm afraid we'll break something." Sarah recognized the fear beneath those words. The internalized message that people in crisis didn't deserve beauty, that poverty should come with punishment. She'd felt it herself when first exploring the lodge, that sense that her presence contaminated spaces meant for better people. This is your home for as long as you need it, up to 6 months with possible extension. You won't break anything that matters, and anything you do break, we'll fix together. Tell me what you need to feel safe here. Maria's shoulders dropped fractionally. I need to know he can't find us. The shelter was careful about records, but here, is this place public knowledge? The sanctuary's existence is public, but our resident list is strictly confidential. We don't share names, photos, or any identifying information with anyone outside our staff without written permission from residents. If your ex-husband somehow finds out you're in Pine Ridge, he still won't know where specifically unless someone tells him. Over the next hour, Sarah learned the familiar story: love that turned controlling, control that became violence, violence that escalated until leaving became the only survival option. Maria had taken the children and fled with 2 suitcases and her nursing textbooks, the only possessions that mattered more than escape speed. They moved into Suite 1 the same afternoon. Carlos examined his bedroom with the careful neutrality of a child who'd learned not to get attached to temporary spaces. Sophia whispered to her rabbit, narrating their new surroundings with the imagination that children used to process chaos. Maria unpacked their belongings with movements that grew progressively slower as exhaustion caught up with adrenaline. Sarah left them to settle, understanding they needed space to believe this was real before they could begin trusting it. She'd learned that truth herself during her first week at the lodge. The way safety took time to feel safe, how the body needed to stop running before the mind could rest. The Johnson family's first week followed a pattern Sarah would see repeated with every subsequent family. Initial hypervigilance gradually softening. Children testing boundaries to confirm they were real and consistent. Maria attending the first counseling session Jennifer arranged with visible reluctance that transformed into tears of relief when the therapist validated rather than questioned her choices. By week 4, Maria was interviewing for a nursing position at Dr. Foster's clinic, a job that would keep her off state databases while still using her skills. By week 8, she'd been hired and was working part-time while the sanctuary's childcare coordinator supervised Carlos and Sophia after school. By week 12, Jennifer had helped Maria secure a subsidized apartment in Pine Ridge's small, affordable housing complex, and the foundation provided first month's rent plus deposits. On moving day, Maria stood in the lodge's kitchen with Sarah while Carlos and Sophia played one last time in the sanctuary playroom. You saved our lives, not just the housing, the belief that we deserve better. Sarah shook her head. You saved your own lives by leaving. We just provided the space for you to catch your breath and plan next steps. That space was everything, the difference between drowning and reaching shore. The Parkers arrived in July, Brian and Jennifer with their 3 teenagers who radiated the particular resentment of young people who'd been forcibly relocated from familiar lives. The twins, 16-year-old boys named Marcus and James, made their displeasure obvious through sullen silence and minimal eye contact. Their sister Kayla, 14, compensated with excessive politeness that felt like its own form of hostility. Brian had worked manufacturing for 23 years before the plant closed without warning, leaving 400 employees scrambling for jobs in an area where manufacturing represented the primary employment sector. Jennifer had survived cancer 2 years prior, and the medical bills from treatment had consumed their savings and pushed them into bankruptcy. When they lost the house to foreclosure, they'd spent 4 months cycling between their car and cheap motels, preserving normalcy for the kids until even that fiction became unsustainable. The teenagers' anger was loudest during family meals. When their presence at the communal table forced interaction, they clearly resented. Marcus pushed food around his plate with aggressive disinterest. James answered questions with single syllables. Kayla maintained her artificial cheerfulness until it cracked during the second week, spilling into a tearful outburst about how they'd never asked to be poor and why couldn't they just go home. David, one of the caseworkers, suggested family therapy. Sarah agreed but added a different intervention based on instinct rather than training. She assigned each teenager responsibilities within the sanctuary. Marcus helped Jake with maintenance projects. James assisted Patricia in the kitchen, And Kayla worked with Emma organizing the playroom and tutoring younger children who would arrive in subsequent months. The strategy worked through a principle Sarah had learned during her nursing career. People healed faster when they felt useful rather than helpless. Marcus discovered he had his father's mechanical aptitude and began shadowing Jake with genuine interest instead of grudging compliance. James found unexpected satisfaction in cooking, in the concrete achievement of producing food that others enjoyed. Kayla connected with Emma's earnestness and stopped performing false contentment in favor of authentic, if complicated, emotions. By September, Brian had found construction work that required a 50-mile commute but paid enough to support the family. Jennifer worked part-time at Maggie's store alongside Sarah, their shared shifts creating friendship from proximity and mutual understanding. The teenagers had enrolled in Pine Ridge High and joined activities. Marcus in auto shop, James in culinary arts, Kayla in volleyball. When the Parkers moved to their own apartment, Jennifer hugged Sarah with the fierceness of someone expressing gratitude beyond words. "We lost everything, but here we remembered we still had each other. That was the treasure we'd forgotten to value." Marcus Brown arrived in October with his daughter Zoe and a grief so fresh it seemed to occupy physical space around him. His wife had died of cancer 18 months ago, and the loss had derailed his career in information technology. Missing deadlines led to warnings, warnings led to termination, and termination led to a downward spiral that ended with eviction and a man who couldn't understand how his life had disintegrated so completely. He struggled with the intake interview, his pride warring against desperation in ways that made his voice tight. "I should be able to provide for my daughter. I had a good job, savings, a house. I don't understand how I ended up here." Sarah had heard variations of this confession from nearly every resident. The disbelief that middle-class stability could evaporate so quickly, that the safety nets promised by society had gaps wide enough to fall through completely. Grief doesn't follow economic logic. You lost your wife. You're allowed to struggle with that loss in ways that affect everything else. Michael connected with Marcus in ways Sarah couldn't quite replicate. They were both men who'd lost central figures too young, who'd spent years navigating absence that had no resolution. Michael invited Marcus to the cottage for coffee, and Sarah would see them talking on the porch during evenings. Two silhouettes against lamplight engaged in conversations she never asked about because some healing required privacy. Zoe and Emma became inseparable within days, creating the kind of intense childhood friendship all built on shared understanding that adults couldn't fully access. They did homework together, invented elaborate games involving Scout as a magical guardian, and spoke in the half-sentences of people who'd learned each other's communication styles through immersion. The Sanctuary enrolled Marcus in an online coding boot camp covering tuition from the program budget. He studied with the focus of someone trying to rebuild an identity as much as a career, working late into nights after Zoe was asleep. 4 months later, he accepted a remote position with a tech company based in Portland, the salary sufficient to support independent housing. "I came here feeling like a failure, like I'd let my daughter down in every way possible. You showed me the difference between struggling and failing. Struggling is human. Failing is giving up. I didn't give up because you didn't let me." Angela White's arrival in January tested the Sanctuary's capacity for flexibility and patience in ways previous families hadn't. She was 24 with 6-month-old twin boys, having aged out of foster care at 18 with none of the support systems most young adults took for granted. The babies had been born premature, requiring extended NICU stays that generated medical bills Angela had no hope of paying. Bankruptcy had followed, then eviction when she couldn't manage rent while caring for infants who needed constant attention. She moved into Suite 4 with a wariness that suggested she was waiting for the inevitable betrayal, the moment when promised help would dissolve into judgment and abandonment. The twins cried in shifts, ensuring that rest became theoretical rather than actual. Angela paced the suite at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., trying to soothe babies who refused soothing while exhaustion made her hands shake. Sarah recognized the signs of someone drowning in real time. She increased the support structure, daily check-ins, parenting classes specifically focused on infant care, therapy sessions twice weekly to address Angela's PTSD from childhood abuse that had landed her in foster care initially. The child care coordinator took the twins for 4 hours each afternoon so Angela could sleep without fear. Progress came in increments barely visible day to day, but obvious across months. Angela earned her GED through online classes, studying during rare moments when both boys slept simultaneously. She discovered an aptitude for cooking during shifts, helping Patricia in the sanctuary kitchen, and that interest blossomed into enrollment in a culinary arts program at the community college. 18 months after arrival, double the standard stay but within the foundation's flexibility parameters, Angela accepted a sous chef position at a restaurant in the next town over. She moved to an apartment near the sanctuary, staying close to the support network that had become her first real family. Nobody ever believed in me before. Not teachers, not social workers, not the foster families who took state money but didn't actually care. You didn't just give me housing, you gave me proof that I could be more than my circumstances. But not every story bent toward redemption. The Davis family arrived in June of the sanctuary's second year, and Sarah knew within a week that their situation exceeded what the sanctuary could handle. Ryan struggled with opioid addiction nominally in recovery, but realistically in constant relapse. Kelly's bipolar disorder went untreated when she stopped taking medication, claiming it made her feel disconnected from herself. Their 3 children ranged from 6 to 11, each displaying behavioral issues that reflected the chaos of their home environment. Sarah tried. She connected Ryan with intensive outpatient treatment. She worked with Kelly's psychiatrist to find medication combinations that might feel more tolerable. She provided structure and stability in every resource the sanctuary could marshal. But addiction and untreated mental illness operated on timelines that didn't align with 3 to 6 month residential stays, and the Davis family's presence began affecting other residents. The breaking point came when Ryan used drugs in his suite while the children slept, and Kelly had a manic episode that frightened the Johnson children who'd returned to visit. Sarah made the hardest decision of her tenure as director. I need you to leave, not because I don't care, but because you're not ready for what this program offers. And staying here is harmful to other families who need this space. Ryan's anger erupted immediately. Kelly's tears followed. But Sarah held firm, helping them transition to an inpatient facility that could provide more intensive intervention than the sanctuary's model allowed. She arranged for the children to stay temporarily with Kelly's sister while their parents underwent treatment. That night, Sarah cried with a depth of emotion she hadn't allowed herself since the early days of homelessness. Michael found her on the lodge's porch, staring at mountains that offered no guidance. You think I failed them? No. You made an impossible choice to protect others. That's leadership, not failure. And you didn't abandon them. You found them better resources. It doesn't feel like enough. It never will. That's the cost of this work. But you can't save everyone, Sarah. You can only create the conditions for people to save themselves and then trust they'll do the work when they're ready. The sanctuary's second anniversary fell on a December evening when snow fell gently rather than aggressively, transforming the landscape into something peaceful instead of threatening. The foundation hosted a gathering for current residents, alumni families, community members, and staff. 23 families had passed through the sanctuary in 2 years. 87% had successfully transitioned to stable housing. The numbers meant something to the board in the grant applications, but to Sarah they represented individual faces in particular struggles and specific moments when despair had shifted toward possibility. Emma, now 10, had written an essay for school that her teacher submitted to a regional competition. It won second place, and the organizers asked permission to display it at the county library. Sarah read it during a quiet moment before the anniversary gathering, seeing her daughter's journey compressed into paragraphs that somehow captured both the terror and the transformation. The essay described cold that penetrated deeper than skin, fear that made sleep impossible, and the particular shame of washing hair in public restrooms while pretending normalcy. But it also described the lodge appearing through the storm like something from a fairy tale. The warmth of the first fire after weeks of freezing, and the moment when Sarah had chosen to find the safe's rightful owner rather than keep life-changing wealth. Emma's conclusion carried the kind of moral clarity that children possessed before the world taught them to compromise their convictions. Being homeless doesn't mean you're bad or you failed. It means you hit a hard time. And sometimes all you need is someone to believe in you and give you a chance. That's what the Carter Sanctuary does. It gives people chances. The anniversary gathering filled the lodge with voices and laughter that would have made Robert and Catherine smile. Angela brought photos of her twins, now sturdy toddlers who'd lost the fragility of premature birth. Maria introduced her new boyfriend, a teacher she'd met through Carlos's school. The Parkers arrived en masse, the teenagers dramatically taller and less angry than they'd been 18 months earlier. Speeches were brief by mutual agreement. Michael thanked the staff and acknowledged how the sanctuary had exceeded his hopes for honoring his parents' legacy. Sarah expressed gratitude to the community that had supported them through learning curves and occasional failures. But the most powerful moment came from Carlos Johnson, now 11, who stood near the fireplace and spoke with the solemnity of someone delivering testimony. I used to be scared all the time. Scared of my dad finding us, scared of being hungry, scared that nowhere was safe. But here I learned I didn't have to be scared anymore. This place taught me what safe actually feels like. After the guests departed and the cleanup was complete, Sarah, Michael, and Emma sat together near the fire that had welcomed them all on different nights of desperate need. Scout dozed at Emma's feet, muzzle now showing gray that marked the passage of time more clearly than calendars. Emma's question was simple. Do you think Robert and Catherine would be happy with what we made? Michael smiled with less hesitation than he would have shown 2 years earlier. I think they'd be very happy. This is exactly what they hoped for. Good, because I think this place is magical. It turns sad people happy, scared people brave, lost people found. Sarah pulled her daughter close, feeling the truth of those words settle into her bones. The lodge had found her when she was lost, had given her purpose when she had none, had transformed her from someone who'd broken a window in desperation to someone who opened doors for others facing their own storms. Outside, snow continued its gentle fall, covering the mountains in fresh white that erased old tracks and prepared the landscape for new journeys. Somewhere in the darkness, another family was struggling, searching for sanctuary they didn't yet know existed. And when they found their way here, through circumstance or luck, or the mysterious architecture of grace, they would discover warm rooms and full meals and staff who understood that sometimes the difference between drowning and reaching shore was simply someone offering a hand at the precise moment when strength ran out. Michael stood and moved to the window, looking out at territory that had once held only painful memories, but now contained something larger. Sarah joined him, their reflections ghostly in the glass. Thinking about what comes next? Always. We've helped 23 families. There are thousands more who need what we offer. The board approved exploring a second location near Seattle. That's ambitious. So is everything else we've accomplished. Why stop now when we're finally getting it right? Sarah considered the question, understanding that ambition and mission weren't the same thing, but could align when purpose drove expansion rather than ego. The sanctuary worked because it stayed small enough to remain personal while being substantial enough to provide genuine support. Replicating that balance in a new location would require the same careful attention they'd invested in this original incarnation. We'll need the right director, someone who understands both the practical requirements and the deeper purpose. I know, Hayes already has candidates being vetted, but that's future planning. Tonight is for acknowledging what we've built here. He turned from the window to face her directly, and Sarah saw something in his expression that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Peace with his past, confidence in his present, hope for his future. The angry, grieving 7-year-old had finally found his way home. Not to the life he'd lost, but to a new life built on the foundation of his parents' love and his own hard-won healing. Thank you for breaking that window, Sarah. For doing what you had to do to serve him, and then choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy. She felt her throat tighten with emotion that words couldn't quite capture. Thank you for trusting me with your parents' dream, for seeing what I could become instead of just seeing what I'd been. Emma's voice called from the couch where she'd curled up with Scout. Are you two going to stand there being emotional, or are we going to play cards like we promised? They laughed and returned to the warmth, to the game that Emma would win through combination of luck and aggressive strategy, to the ordinary evening that was itself extraordinary because 2 years ago, Sarah hadn't believed she'd have a future that included ordinary evenings again. The fire burned low, and Sarah fetted another log, watching flames climb the new wood with the same fascination she'd felt that first desperate night. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, having witnessed countless human dramas across centuries. But inside these walls, something precious and fragile and necessary continued: the work of transformation, the practice of compassion, the simple radical act of believing that everyone deserved a second chance to build a life worth living. The Carter Sanctuary wasn't just a building or a program or a line item in nonprofit databases. It was a promise made concrete, a dream inherited and honored, and proof that sometimes the worst moments in life created paths toward the most meaningful destinations. Sarah had arrived here frozen and desperate, had found a safe that held more than money, and had chosen to honor the dead by serving the living. That choice had saved her. And in saving her, it had created the possibility of saving others, which meant Robert and Catherine's love hadn't ended with their deaths. It had simply found new channels, new expressions, new ways of reaching people who needed exactly what they'd once offered their son: sanctuary, safety, and the unshakable belief that he mattered. The legacy continued. The door stayed open. And somewhere out in the winter darkness, another family was heading towards shelter they didn't yet know awaited them, carried forward by hope and luck and the mysterious grace that sometimes arrive precisely when needed most, in the form of an abandoned lodge appearing through the storm like an answer to prayers that hadn't yet been spoken.